The diamond felt cold against my skin, a tiny, perfect iceberg in the wreckage of my life. It was the third month of the long gray winter that had followed my father's death, a season defined by the scent of wilting funeral lilies and the hollow ache in my chest that had become a permanent resident. Marcus had chosen a restaurant overlooking the river, its dark water a mirror for the starless sky. He'd ordered champagne, and the tiny bubbles rising in my flute felt like the only cheerful thing in a world that had gone silent and monochrome. When he slid the small, square velvet box across the crisp white tablecloth, my first thought was a sharp, stabbing pang of guilt. How could I be feeling this forbidden flicker of joy when my father was gone from the earth? "Olivia," he said, his voice the low, steady baritone that had been my anchor for the past 94 days. He took my hand, his thumb stroking the back of it, a gesture of such practiced, perfect tenderness. "I know the timing is unconventional. I know you're still hurting, but I've seen your strength, your grace through all of this, and it's only made me more certain. I don't want to face another day without you. I want to be the man who helps you build a new life, a new beginning, a light in the darkness." His words were a perfectly crafted key, designed to unlock the most vulnerable, unguarded parts of my grieving heart. A light in the darkness. It was everything I craved, everything I felt I'd lost forever. My father, a man whose presence had been as constant and reliable as the sunrise, had been extinguished by a sudden, brutal heart attack that left no time for goodbyes. At 32, I was an orphan, adrift in a sea of estate lawyers, condolence cards, and a silence in his house so profound it had its own physical weight. Marcus had been my lifeboat. He'd appeared in my life 6 months before Dad died, a charming, handsome stranger who'd spilled coffee on me at a local cafe and insisted on buying me a new coat. Now he was the only thing holding me together, the only solid ground in a world that had turned to quicksand. I looked at the ring, a classic solitaire that threw prisons of light under the restaurant's dim, forgiving lamps. It was a promise. Not just of marriage, but of a future. Something I had stopped believing in the moment I got the call from the hospital. My father's death hadn't just left a hole in my life. It had left me with the keys to his. A successful HVAC business he'd built from nothing. A portfolio of carefully chosen investments. And the paid-off Tudor house I'd grown up in. An inheritance worth nearly $1 million. It felt less like a gift and more like a crushing weight. A legacy I was terrified of mismanaging, of dishonoring. "We can use this to build something new, Liv," Marcus whispered, his voice a warm current in the cold room, echoing a conversation we'd had just a week prior. We'd been sitting at my father's old oak desk, surrounded by stacks of financial statements that felt like a foreign language to me. A fresh start. For us. My eyes filled with tears, the hot, familiar sting of grief, now mixed with something new and fragile, hope. He saw the inheritance not as a burden, but as an opportunity for us. He wasn't intimidated by it. He was embracing it. He was embracing me. In that moment, he wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my savior. The man who was going to lead me back into the light. The cold diamond suddenly felt warm against my skin. "Yes," I whispered, my voice choked with an emotion so overwhelming I could barely breathe. "Yes, Marcus. Of course, yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. It felt like a seal, a promise to lock out the pain and start over. But what I didn't know then was that the lock was on the outside of a cage, and I was the one stepping willingly inside, blinded by the sparkle of a future that was nothing but a mirage. The weeks after my father's death were a blur, a watercolor painting left out in the rain where all the colors ran together into a muddy gray. I remember the scratchy wool of the black dress I wore to the funeral, the cloying, sickly sweetness of the floral arrangements that filled the house, the endless parade of faces, their mouths forming sympathetic shapes I couldn't quite decipher. Through it all, Marcus was a solid, unwavering presence. He was the rock against which my waves of grief crashed and receded. While I was struggling to simply breathe, he was managing the logistics of my new, fractured reality, a bastion of calm competence. He handled the caterer for the reception, his voice a soothing, capable murmur on the phone. I overheard him once, talking to one of my distraught aunts, his tone a perfect blend of patience and empathy. "I know it's hard, Jean," he'd said. "Olivia is so grateful you're here. We'll get through this together." He absorbed their frantic energy so I wouldn't have to. He held me at night in my father's cavernous house, the unfamiliar silence of the rooms a constant, screaming reminder of my loss. His body next to mine was a warm, living shield against the ghosts that haunted every hallway. I'd wake up from nightmares, my breath catching in a sob, and he'd be there instantly, stroking my hair, whispering, "I've got you, Liv. I'm right here." And I believed him. I clung to him like a drowning woman. My older sister, Chloe, flew in from Seattle, her presence a sharp, pragmatic contrast to my emotional fog. She watched Marcus with a quiet, analytical gaze I found intensely irritating. "He seems very involved," she'd commented one afternoon. We were in the kitchen, and through the doorway, we could see him at the dining room table, on the phone with the bank, patiently navigating some issue with my father's frozen accounts, a pen tucked behind his ear, like he'd been doing it his whole life. "He's being supportive, Chloe," I'd snapped, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. "It's what a partner does. I'd be lost without him." "I know," she'd said, her tone gentle but with an edge I couldn't quite place. "It's just a lot. For someone you've only known for a few months. He's all over the finances." I dismissed it as the cynicism of a perpetually overprotective older sister who lived 1,000 miles away and didn't understand. I needed Marcus's support. I was drowning, and he was the only one throwing me a rope. Nowhere was his support more evident than in the meetings with my father's estate lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, whose office smelled of old books and peppermint. Marcus insisted on coming with me to every single one, holding my hand under the heavy mahogany table as Mr. Abernathy explained the complexities of probate, trusts, and tax law. I was in a fog, the legal jargon washing over me, incomprehensible and overwhelming, but Marcus was sharp, incredibly focused. "So, with the property holdings," he'd interject, his brow furrowed in a mask of intense concentration. "What are the tax implications if Olivia were to, say, add a domestic partner to the deed down the line? Purely hypothetically, of course, for asset protection." Mr. Abernathy would peer at him over his spectacles. "Well, that would depend on several factors, young man." Marcus would nod, absorbing the information, asking follow-up questions about investment accounts, capital gains, and liquidity that I didn't even know to ask. It all sounded so responsible, so forward-thinking, so incredibly helpful. He was helping me navigate this terrifying new landscape. He framed it as taking a burden off my shoulders. "You focus on grieving, honey," he'd say at night, as he organized the mountain of paperwork on the dining room table into neat color-coded folders. "Let me handle the nuts and bolts. We're a team." He was systematically learning every single detail of my financial inheritance, every asset, every password, every vulnerability. He wasn't just my emotional support. He was becoming my de facto financial advisor. And in the depths of my sorrow, I handed him the keys to the kingdom without a second thought. I was so profoundly grateful not to be alone that I never stopped to ask why this relative stranger was so eager to carry my burden. I thought he was my partner in grief, but he was just an architect, patiently surveying the foundation of the vault he was planning to rob. The engagement felt like a new chapter, a sunrise after an endless night. For 6 months, we were bathed in the warm glow of planning a future. We talked about wedding venues in the fall, guest lists, and honeymoons in Italy. It was a welcome, necessary distraction, a project that pulled me out of the suffocating past and forced me to look ahead. Marcus was a whirlwind of enthusiasm, creating intricate spreadsheets for budgets and timelines. And the budget, of course, was funded by the inheritance. "Your dad would have wanted this, Liv," he'd say, whenever I felt a pang of guilt about spending the money that felt like it was still his. "He would have wanted to see you happy, to see you taken care of." He was an absolute expert at using my father's memory as leverage to get what he wanted. The first crack in the beautiful facade appeared on a Tuesday evening. We were in the kitchen of my dad's house, our house, as Marcus now exclusively called it. The air smelled of the garlic and basil from the pasta sauce simmering on the stove. It was a scene of perfect, comforting domesticity. "You know, I was talking to a buddy of mine in real estate," he began, his tone almost comically casual as he swirled a glass of Cabernet. "He was saying we should really get my name on the deed before the wedding. Something about simplifying the transfer of assets and avoiding probate if, God forbid, something were to happen to you. Right of survivorship, he called it. It's just a smart, practical thing to do for a couple about to be married." I stopped stirring the sauce, the wooden spoon suddenly heavy in my hand. A strange, cold prickle went down my spine, an instinctual alarm. The house was the most tangible thing my father had left me. Every scuff on the hardwood floor, every nail hole in the walls held a specific memory. The thought of adding Marcus's name to the legal document that bound it to me felt wrong. It felt like an intrusion, a violation of something sacred. "I don't know, Marcus," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "It feels a little fast. The estate just settled a few months ago." His smile tightened at the corners, losing all of its easy warmth. "Fast? Olivia, we're getting married in 6 months. This is going to be my home too. It's about protecting our future, together. It's a standard legal protection." "I know, it's just, it was my dad's," I finished lamely, unable to articulate the deep, gut-level resistance I was feeling. His face hardened. The charming, supportive mask slipped, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something cold and impatient in his eyes. It was gone in a second, but I saw it. "So it will always be your dad's and never ours?" He shot back, his voice taking on a sharp, wounded edge that was designed to make me feel guilty. "Is that what you're saying? That you don't trust me? After everything I've done for you? I thought we were a team, but maybe I was wrong." He turned away, setting his wine glass down on the granite counter with a sharp, angry click. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Trust. He was using my own sense of gratitude and obligation as a weapon against me. A few weeks later, he tried again, this time with the investment portfolio my father had spent 30 years building. "Babe, it would be so much easier to pay for the caterer and the band if we had a joint investment account," he said, scrolling through his phone at the breakfast table, the picture of modern efficiency. "We could liquidate some of these older, low-yield stocks your dad had, move them into something more aggressive, and pay for everything from one place. It's just about simplifying things, making our lives easier." When I hesitated again, remembering the cold, sick feeling from our last conversation, his reaction was faster, harsher. "You know what? Forget it," he snapped, throwing his phone onto the table with a clatter that made me jump. "It's your money. Do whatever you want with it. I'm just trying to help build our life here. But clearly, you're not ready to have a real partner." He stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped loudly against the floor, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the sudden, jarring silence and the bitter taste of coffee in my mouth. His anger was like a flash of lightning, illuminating the landscape of our relationship in a stark, ugly light. It wasn't the reaction of a loving fiancé meeting with a moment of gentle resistance. It was the raw frustration of a predator whose prey was refusing to walk quietly into the trap. That cold prickle of unease returned, stronger this time, a silent alarm bell ringing in the deepest part of my gut, a part I had been ignoring for months. The silence in the house after he stormed out was different. It wasn't the hollow, grieving silence I had grown accustomed to. It was a tense, questioning silence, thick with my own doubt. My hands were trembling as I picked up my phone and dialed Chloe's number. I told her everything, the conversation about the deed, his shocking anger about the investment accounts, the coldness in his eyes. I expected, and I told you so. Instead, my sister's voice was calm, deadly serious, and laced with an urgency that terrified me. "Olivia, this is not normal," she said, her voice a lifeline of sanity in my sea of confusion. "This is a massive red flag. Grieving people are vulnerable. Con artists know that. You are a textbook target, a sudden inheritance, emotionally destabilized. It's a predator's dream." "A con artist?" I whispered, the words feeling ridiculous, melodramatic, like something from a bad movie. "Chloe, that's crazy. This is Marcus, the man who held me while I cried for a month straight." "Is it?" she challenged, her voice sharp. "Who is he really? Where did he go to college? Where did he grow up? Have you ever met a single member of his family or even a friend from his past?" Her questions landed like a series of rapid-fire punches to the gut. I realized with a sickening jolt that I didn't know the answers to any of them. He had a vague, romantic backstory about growing up in Oregon with parents who had since passed away in a tragic accident, a story I'd never had reason to question. He'd been a blank slate onto which I had projected all my hopes for a future. "I want you to do something for me," Chloe said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I'm going to send you a link to a private investigation service. They do deep background checks. Please live. For me, for Dad. Just do it." A war raged inside me. The guilt at my suspicion, the shame at my naivete, and a rising tide of pure cold fear. I ended the call and stared at the link Chloe had texted me. That night, when Marcus came back, his arms full of my favorite peonies, his face a mask of perfect apology, blaming his outburst on wedding stress and fear of losing me, I smiled and played along. But after he fell asleep, his breathing deep and even beside me, I slipped out of bed. I crept to my office, and with a tremor in my hand that had nothing to do with grief, I filled out the online form. I paid the hefty fee with my own credit card, and I waited. The email arrived a week later. The subject line was chillingly neutral. "Your report is ready." For a full 10 minutes, I just stared at it in my inbox, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I felt it in my throat. Clicking that link felt like a monumental betrayal. Not clicking it felt like a greater fool's errand. I took a deep breath, the air burning my lungs, and opened the attached PDF. It was 27 pages long, a detailed, footnoted timeline of a life I didn't recognize. Marcus Reeves wasn't even his real name. He was born Mark Peterson in Dayton, Ohio. He didn't grow up in Oregon. His parents weren't dead. They were alive and well and lived in a suburb of Cleveland. But that was just the innocuous beginning. The report listed his previous legal addresses, and next to them, the names of his former partners. There were 3 of them. A woman named Katherine Miller in Denver, a recent divorcee who had received a large settlement. A woman named Maria Flores in Austin, whose parents had died and left her their successful family restaurant. A woman named Sarah Jenkins in Scottsdale, a lottery winner. Each relationship had lasted between 12 and 18 months. Each one had started shortly after the woman's sudden influx of wealth. Each had ended with the woman in a precarious financial position and Mark Peterson gone, vanished into thin air, only to re-emerge in a new city with a new name. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. My entire body went cold, a deathly cellular chill. It wasn't just a lie. It was a pattern, a methodology, a career. But the final, soul-crushing blow came in the addendum from the private investigator Chloe had insisted I hire to dig deeper. They had subpoenaed his internet search history from the 6 months leading up to our first meeting. The report showed a list of searches, a digital breadcrumb trail leading straight to me. Top small businesses, Oakwood County, Frank Park, Parks HVAC, net worth. Frank Park, family, daughter. Olivia Park, veterinarian, workplace. Oakwood Grind coffee shop, hours. He had researched me. He had targeted me. He knew about my father's business, about his wealth, before he ever set foot in that coffee shop. The memory of our meet-cute replayed in my mind. No longer a charming romantic story, but a scene from a horror film. His surprised stumble. The hot coffee splashing on my coat. His profuse fumbling, just the right amount of embarrassed apologies. His boyish insistence on getting my number to pay for the dry cleaning. It was all a script. Every word, every gesture had been rehearsed. He hadn't stumbled into my life. He had ambushed it. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He had seen a grieving daughter with a significant inheritance as an easy mark. He had stood by my father's grave, his arm around me, holding me as I wept. And all he had felt was the thrill of the hunt, the cold satisfaction of a predator closing in on its prey. The grief I felt for my father was suddenly eclipsed by a new, monstrous grief for myself. For the woman who had been so lost in the dark that she had mistaken a wolf for a lighthouse. For a few hours, I sat in the dark of my father's office, the damning report glowing on the screen, paralyzed by a cold, silent rage that was deeper and more absolute than anything I had ever known. The tears wouldn't come. The shock was too profound, the violation too complete. He hadn't just tried to steal my money. He had taken my most sacred, vulnerable moments, my grief for my father, and twisted them into a tool for his own enrichment. He had danced on my father's grave to line his own pockets. The man sleeping in my bed, wearing my father's old flannel robe, was a complete stranger, a monster wearing a human face. My first instinct was to scream, to run into the bedroom and confront him, to throw his perfectly curated life into chaos. But as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by something else, something I inherited from my father. A quiet, methodical, and unshakable resolve. My dad had built his business on precision, on understanding how systems worked. Confronting Marcus would be emotional, satisfying for a moment, but it wouldn't bring justice. He would just disappear, as he had with Katherine, Maria, and Sarah, and move on to his next victim. He wouldn't pay, he wouldn't be stopped, and the memory of my father deserved more than that. I wouldn't just be his victim, I would be his reckoning. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not Mr. Abernathy, but a name I got from a friend, a criminal fraud attorney named Jessica Thorne. She was known for being sharp, relentless, and unforgiving. I met her in her downtown office. A sterile space of glass and steel that felt a world away from the emotional wreckage of my life. I laid out the entire story, my voice steady, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me to keep them from shaking. I presented the private investigator's report, the timeline of his lies, the names of the other women. Jessica listened, her expression unreadable, her steepled fingers resting beneath her chin. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "He's a parasite," she said, her voice flat and devoid of pity. "These predators thrive on the shame of their victims. They count on you being too embarrassed, too heartbroken to go to the police. They operate in the shadows." She leaned forward, her intense, intelligent eyes locking onto mine. "He's done this 3 times before without consequence. To get a criminal conviction, we can't just show that he's a liar and a scumbag. We need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt his intent to commit fraud against you. We need to catch him in the act." And so the plan began to form. A trap. A sting. It was audacious, terrifying, and in that moment it felt like the only way to reclaim a part of myself he had tried to steal. A first and hardest step was to find the other women. Jessica's office helped track them down. My first call was to Katherine, the divorcee from Denver. I dialed the number with a shaking hand, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. A wary voice answered on the 3rd ring. I introduced myself, my voice small and thin. "My name is Olivia Park. I believe we have both been in a relationship with a man who calls himself Marcus Reeves, or maybe Mark Peterson." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, so profound I thought she might have hung up. Then I heard her take a sharp, ragged breath. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice thick with a shame I knew intimately. "You too?" Her story poured out of her, a torrent of pain and humiliation that mirrored my own. The same lines, the same manufactured future, the same aggressive push for financial control that ended with him draining her settlement accounts and vanishing without a trace. As we spoke, the shame in her voice was slowly replaced by a white-hot anger. By the end of the call, she was the one comforting me. I made 2 more calls that day, to Maria in Austin and Sarah in Scottsdale. The stories were sickeningly, devastatingly similar. By nightfall, I had forged an unwilling sisterhood, a coalition of the wronged. They had all been too ashamed to report him, but my call had changed everything. Together, we were no longer just victims. We were evidence. We worked with Jessica and a police detective named Harding, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to our stories with a quiet, simmering fury. The plan we devised was simple in its concept, but terrifying in its execution. I would have to continue playing the part of the loving, trusting fiancé. I would have to go back into the lion's den and dangle a bigger, juicier piece of bait. I would have to convince Marcus that he was about to hit the ultimate jackpot. Every survival instinct in my body screamed against it. But the image of him standing by my father's grave, his face a perfect mask of sorrow, burned in my mind and gave me the strength to agree. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The week that followed was the longest and most difficult of my life. Living with Marcus, knowing what I knew, was a form of psychological torture. Every time he touched me, my skin crawled. Every loving word he uttered was like acid in my ears. One evening, he came home with a gift, a beautiful silk scarf. "I saw it and thought of you," he said, wrapping it around my neck. I knew he had bought it with the credit card I'd given him for household expenses. I had to smile and thank him, my face aching from the effort, while my insides were screaming with revulsion. I was performing the role of a lifetime, fueled by adrenaline and a rage so pure it was almost calming. I studied him, his habits, his tells. I saw the flash of greed in his eyes when he browsed luxury watch websites, the subtle way he'd steer every conversation back to our financial future. I was no longer seeing my fiancé. I was seeing a specimen under a microscope. The time came to set the trap. We were having dinner, the same pasta dish I'd been making the night the first crack appeared in his facade. I took a deep breath, marshaled every ounce of acting ability I possessed, and let my eyes fill with tears. "What is it, Liv? "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, his face a picture of perfect, loving concern. It was a flawless performance. I got a call from Mr. Abernathy today," I began, my voice trembling convincingly. "It's incredible. I don't even know how to tell you." I paused, letting the suspense build as I dabbed at my eyes with a napkin. "They found another life insurance policy. One my dad took out years ago through his business and forgot about. Marcus, it's for $1 million. I watched his face and I saw it. For a split second, before his actor's instincts could catch up, his mask of concern slipped. It was replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated, triumphant greed. His pupils actually dilated. It was the look of a wolf seeing a wounded deer. He quickly schooled his features back into an expression of shocked disbelief, but I had seen it. It was all the confirmation I needed. $1 million? He breathed, his hand shooting across the table to grab mine. "Oh my God, Olivia. That's life-changing. We're set. Your dad, he's still taking care of you." The hypocrisy of him invoking my father's name was so profound it almost made me gag. His urgency became frantic over the next few days. Just as Detective Harding had predicted, he was a shark that had scented blood in the water. "We need to protect that money, babe," he said, his voice urgent, pacing the living room. "We can't just let it sit in a regular bank account. I found a high-yield offshore account that's completely secure. We can transfer all the inheritance, the original amount plus the new policy, into it. No taxes, no government oversight. We'll be untouchable. We can finally relax." The trap was ready to be sprung. The police, with the help of a cybercrimes unit, had set up a dummy offshore banking website. It was a perfect, flawless replica. Any attempt to transfer funds from my accounts would be logged, time-stamped, and traced directly to his laptop. All I had to do was get him to log in and click the button. The final night arrived. I felt strangely, preternaturally calm, the eye of my own personal hurricane. We were in my father's office, the two of us sitting at the big oak desk side by side, our laptops open. The air was thick with his anticipation. Outside, a team of plainclothes officers, including Detective Harding, sat in an unmarked van down the street, monitoring everything. "Okay," I said, my voice only shaking slightly as I pushed his laptop toward him. "I set up the wire transfer authorization. All the funds are ready to move. The bank just needs the final confirmation from the account holder. I put all the login details in this document for you. Can you just do it?" My hands are shaking too much. I looked at him, my eyes wide and trusting. The ultimate damsel in distress, fragile and in need of her strong man. He gave me a condescendingly reassuring smile, patting my hand. "Of course, babe. Don't you worry about a thing. I've got this." He turned to the laptop, his shoulders hunched with focus. I watched his reflection in the dark window in front of the desk. His face was alight with a feverish excitement, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. He was moments away from securing his prize, nearly $2 million. He was already spending it in his head. He typed in the username and password I'd given him. He navigated to the wire transfer page. His finger hovered over the trackpad for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. I held my breath. He clicked confirm. For a second, nothing happened. Then, instead of a confirmation screen showing a successful transfer, his laptop screen went black. White text appeared, stark and clinical. "This terminal is the property of the Oakwood Police Department. All activity has been logged." At the exact same instant, a loud, authoritative knock rattled the front door. 3 heavy thumps that sounded like a judge's gavel striking down a final verdict. Marcus stared at the screen, his face a slow-motion collapse of confusion, disbelief, and dawning abject horror. His head snapped toward me, his eyes wide and wild. The charming fiancé was gone, replaced by the cornered, terrified rat he truly was. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape. I looked down at him, at this pathetic shell of a man, and I felt a vast, cold emptiness where my love for him used to be. "I think that's for you, Marcus," I said, my voice as steady and as cold as ice. Detective Harding led the way. The sight of the police uniforms filling the doorway of my father's office seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Marcus started sputtering, a string of desperate, incoherent lies. "There's been a mistake. We've been hacked. It was a virus. Olivia, tell them." But he wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading, then shifting to pure, venomous hatred when he saw the unyielding, quiet resolve on my face. Harding read him his rights and cuffed him, the metallic click of the handcuffs a sound of beautiful final punctuation. As they led him away, past the framed photos of my father and me on the mantelpiece, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt the profound, solemn relief of a great weight being lifted. He had tried to rob me of my future, my security, and my father's legacy. But standing there, in my father's house, I had never felt more in control. The darkness he had promised to lead me out of was his own, and I had just locked the door behind him. The trial was a blur of muted colors and hushed courtroom proceedings. Marcus, stripped of his charm and expensive clothes, looked small and insignificant in his ill-fitting suit. His defense was laughable, that it was all a misunderstanding, a joint financial decision gone wrong. But his lies crumbled under the combined weight of our stories. Katherine, Maria, Sarah, and I sat together in the front row every day, a united, unshakable front. We took the stand one by one, our voices clear and strong, and we told the court not just what he had done to our finances, but what he had done to our lives, our trust, our ability to feel safe in the world. From the witness stand, I looked him directly in the eye and said, "He didn't just target my inheritance. He targeted my grief. He used the memory of my father as a weapon against me." The digital evidence was irrefutable, but it was our four voices, telling the same sickening story of predatory manipulation. That sealed his fate. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, one for each of the women he had tried to destroy and one for the road. The moment the verdict was read, I felt the hands of Katherine, Maria, and Sarah find mine. As the bailiff led him away, he looked back at us, his face a mask of impotent rage. We didn't flinch. We simply watched him go, 4 strangers bound by a shared trauma, now free of its source. In the months that followed, I began to heal. I sold the house, not because it was tainted, but because it was my father's, and I needed to build my own. With a portion of the inheritance, I started a small foundation, the Park Project. Its mission is to provide free financial and legal counsel to those who have recently lost a loved one, to help them navigate the bewildering world of estates and inheritance, and to protect them from the parasites who circle the grieving like vultures. I began to speak publicly, sharing my story, transforming my pain into a shield for others. He had tried to use my father's legacy as his personal slush fund, but in the end, his greed had only illuminated the true value of what my father had left me. Not the money, but the resilience, the strength, and the unwavering belief that you fight for what's right, no matter the cost. My love for Marcus had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion, but the strength I found in its ashes was real. He thought my grief had made me weak, but he was wrong. It had forged me into something he never saw coming.